In recent times in football, we've seen great players, famously Messi and Ronaldo, who are known as the two standout players of their era. Right now we can see the likes of Kylian Mbappe, you know, doing great things at World Cups. Young Lamine Yamal, who's been very impressive. There's a lot of great players in football. But prior to Messi and Ronaldo, there were great players. And as it's a World Cup year, I'm just going to talk about two players in particular and also talk about some other players that were playing during their time. I like to call them great players prior to the 2010s era. These two players, one is Brazilian and one is from France. The Brazilian Ronaldo, the Ronaldo prior to this Portuguese Ronaldo. Some people call him the Brazilian Ronaldo, some say the real Ronaldo. I'd like to call him the original Ronaldo. And the other player, Zinedine Zidane from France, who was a unique, great playmaker during his time. I mentioned these two as I believe they defined their era, the late 90s, 2000s era. Great players for their clubs and also for their country. And at some point, they even played on the same team, Real Madrid. So let's start with Ronaldo. Ronaldo was something different, They call him the phenomenon. As a young player, immediately just started to dominate football. Very impressive in Brazilian football, where he, as a 17-year-old, he was selected for the 1994 Brazilian team. Unfortunately for him, he didn't really play. I don't believe he had a minute, but just shows how talented he was that he was selected. So great for Brazil that Europe started to, notice him. He was signed for PSV, the Dutch team. During that time, the Dutch league was one of the top leagues in Europe, and Ronaldo was very impressive during his time, nearly scoring a goal a game for PSV. And then Barcelona signed him. They broke the world record. And in his only season for Barcelona, which I believe to be his peak season, he was very, very impressive. The best player in the world, top scorer in Spain, helped win cups, Cup Winners' Cup. I believe they won the Copa del Rey as well. One famous goal he scored where his coach, Bobby Robson, couldn't believe what he saw. This was just a different type of striker, someone that could just take the game, not heavily reliant on service, that could score goals, drop deep, link play, could play the role as a striker, but then could also had like winger traits where he had great dribbling ability, very explosive and devastating. So Barcelona, he was very impressive, and then he went to Inter Milan, another world record bid. Like Maradona of the past, he broke the world record twice. Ronaldo did that at a very young age. Very impressive in his first season for Inter Milan, helped them win the UEFA Cup, and was considered to being the best player during that time, prior to the 1998 World Cup, where he helped Brazil reach the World Cup final with impressive performances. Unfortunately for him, he suffered, I don't know whether it was like a physical or mental problem during that final where there were doubts of whether he was going to play. Eventually he did. He didn't have his best game and Brazil lost. And then after that, he started to suffer with a lot of injuries. So he wasn't completing full seasons and some devastating injuries which led him being out of football for a long time. So some say that hindered him and he didn't really show the best of himself for a long time due to those injuries. Eventually he returned and was fit enough to play in the 2002 World Cup, where he helped inspire Brazil to their 5th World Cup, their last World Cup win, scoring 8 goals, including 2 in the final. He scored a winner in the semi-final. He formed a devastating attacking trio with Rivaldo, who was a great player during his time, who's someone who seems to be in Ronaldo's shadow, but a very great player in his own right, and the young Ronaldinho, who was also another great player prior to Messi and Ronaldo. Young in 2002, but showed promise, and even broke English hearts during that World Cup. So yeah, Ronaldo, it was seen as his redemption story, helped Brazil win the World Cup, and then he got a move to Real Madrid where he got to play with Zidane, scored goals for Real Madrid, wasn't at his absolute best, but was still one of the best players in the world during his time at Real Madrid. And then eventually, due to injuries and, somewhat lack of professionalism, his career after Real Madrid wasn't the same. He had stints at AC Milan and then he went back to Brazil. And in the 2006 World Cup, he became the all-time top scorer of the World Cup, breaking Gerd Muller's record, who held it for over 30 years, I believe. Yeah, over 30 years he held that record, and Ronaldo broke it against my country, Ghana, and held that record until Closer broke it, and then Messi eventually now holds the record. So at the time Ronaldo retired, he was the World Cup's all-time top scorer. He was known as one of the greatest players of all time, one of the greatest players in his position, a very successful player who won trophies with Brazil and the various clubs that he played in. So let's talk about Zidane. Zidane was a unique player, a player who was very skillful, magical, and artist, but had the physical profile also. So he wasn't small. He's about 6'1", 6'2", but played as if he was one as a smaller player, even though he had that physical traits about him. Zidane started his career in France. He impressed, won French Player of the Year whilst playing in the French league, and then he eventually earned a move to European champions Juventus, impressed in the Serie A for Juventus, won league titles. He didn't win the Champions League at Juve. He lost 2 finals, but he was very impressive in the Champions League during that time. He was known as one of the best players in the world. In the 1998 World Cup, Zidane, as the talisman of his team, helped France win the World Cup. He had a great performance in the final, scoring 2 goals, and was just excellent against Brazil, against Ronaldo. And then over the years, he was performing for Juventus. In Euro 2000, he helped France win the Euros. He was player of the tournament, so he helped inspire France to becoming world and European champions whilst playing a pivotal part. His game, he was a playmaker, somebody who, influenced games through setting up his teammates, dribbling, his skill, but also had a knack of scoring key pivotal goals. He also played with another great French player, Thierry Henry, who was very great in his own right. But Zidane was the face of a very talented French team, talented French generation. Eventually, he went to Real Madrid, and in his first season, he helped inspire Real Madrid to the Champions League, where he scored one of the greatest goals ever seen in the Champions League, a brilliant volley against Bayer Leverkusen. So he was a world champion, he was a European champion for France, and he was also a Champions League winner, whilst performing in his native country, France, the French League, the Italian League, and now the Spanish League. A year later, with Ronaldo, they won the league title. They had this Galactico team where Ronaldo, Figo, Beckham. Beckham joined after they won the league, but Raul as well. They had a lot of star players. And he was still performing for Real Madrid up until his retirement. And then he played his final World Cup in 2006, where he still showed glimpses of his greatness, particularly against Brazil, where he had a man of the match performance. He had a knack for performing against Brazil and helped inspire France to a win. France went to the World Cup final through Zidane's excellence. He scored 3 goals during that tournament, including a goal in the final where he chipped Buffon, one of the greatest ever goalkeepers. He lost his head in that World Cup final, famously headbutting Marco Materazzi in his final game. And France lost the game on penalties. And in some ways, you can say Zidane let his country down, but due to what he had already achieved and the great player that he was, I'm sure French people still appreciate his contribution. So I just wanted to talk about 2 players who, prior to Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, they were the 2 standout players in the era. They were both 3-time FIFA World Player of the Year, which at the time was the highest individual award. And, Messi eventually has won 7 or 8, and Ronaldo has won 5 as well. But at the time, they held the record of the most FIFA World Players. Both of them won the Ballon d'Or as well. So, very talented players, not the exact same type of player. Ronaldo was a striker, more of a forward, devastating player, and Zidane was an elegant attacking midfielder who influenced the game in another way. But two great all-time players in their own rights who were very, very successful for their club, and also at World Cups they made their name by both of them being World Cup winners. So I just wanted to talk about them as the World Cup is going on. We can see great performances from great players, but there were also great players in the past as well. And these two players in particular were great players and played really well during their time. And this is prior to the era where people around my age have seen Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo and these great players now. But right before that, there were two players who were great in their own way and had great performances for their club, but also at World Cups as well. So as we can see, the great players now performing at World Cups. These two players, they made a massive impact during the World Cup, and both scored in finals, both had great moments. And yeah, just two very special players prior to the 2010s, and also played in the same team, and they're trendsetters towards, in terms of inspiring a whole generation to emulate their performances. So yeah, you can't tell the story of football, particularly modern football, without talking about Ronaldo Nazario and Zinedine Zidane.